Well, I am one of 11 individuals who call Antonio Pingitore Grandpa. And there are several of us in the audience today, including several grandchildren and a couple of great-grandchildren. And I'd like to thank everybody possible for today's special memorial. We all know and loved our Conchetta grandmother, but neither she or our parents or our aunts and uncles ever talked much about what happened to our grandfather. Even though his picture and a honor from the city of Kenosha was posted on their wall in their living room, it was a topic that nobody wanted to talk about. It wasn't until we elderly grandchildren started doing research and dug into what was going on, and over the years we've come to find out what the story is. Even though we never had the honor nor the privilege of meeting him face to face, it will always be a part of our lives and history. We're here today to join with all of you to honor him as well as others who have given the ultimate gift of their life. What I'd like to do now is give you a brief history of what Antonio is and what he became to be. He was born on September 12th in 1884 in the village of Pinavidiano, province of Calabria in Italy. One of 11 children of Gennaro and Mary Pingitore. I don't know why he traveled to this land far away from his home, but I just think that it was like other immigrants, he was looking for a better life. And so one day in 1889, at 15 years of age, he traveled down to Naples, boarded the steamship Archimilio, and traveled to the United States, eventually ending up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. His first job was a slate picker, sorting coal from the scrap that came out of the mine. It was a dirty, filthy, difficult job in the heat, and the pay was very little, but it was a start. As he reached adulthood, he met and fell in love with another immigrant who had arrived from Italy by the name of Concetta Ferrata. They fell in love and they were soon married. After the birth of the first son, my father Frank, an event happened at the mine that would change his history forever. There was a landslide in the mine, and a young man got trapped. So Antonio went in and held the man's hand until the searchers could come and rescue them. But after that, he realized that this is not his coming. Life had to be something better than this. Some friends told him there was a place where you could get work in a place called Kenosha, out west, in the state of Wisconsin, which he never heard of. But he thought, okay, I've gone this far, let's try something new. So he picked up his wife and his son and traveled to Kenosha. His first job was with the Chicago Brass Company. And after a while, he gained a plumber's apprenticeship, and after a while, he got his apprenticeship license. During that time, or along that time, he got his citizenship, and he and Concetta added 8 children to their family. All the while, he was interested in police work, and he was used as a deputy sheriff for some time, and he also worked with Pinkerton. Now, there was an increase in the population of the Italians in that time, and they were looking for someone who could communicate with those people. Someone mentioned it was so they could control the foreign element, but I'm not sure that. So in 1914, he was hired as a policeman in the Kenosha Police Department. During his time on watch, he participated in the solution of a lot of crimes, and he traveled to Chicago many times to pursue people that had fled down there. A story related to the news at the time of his death was from a little girl who donated some money to the family because she thought he was her cop. She said that when he was on patrol, he would often talk to her and tell her how to raise his puppy. You could call this an example of community policing at its best. On the evening of March 30, 1919, several men came up from Chicago looking for places to rob. And after about 3 or 4 days, they decided on March 30th, the Kenosha Brass would be the ideal place to do. So what they did was they broke into the offices that night, tied up the night watchman, broke into the safe, and got out with $50,000 Liberty bonds. Then they decided that they would get on the train and go back down to Chicago. The problem was there was no train till the next day. So Plan B went into effect. They would grab a taxi cab and have him drive him to Chicago. The taxi cab driver was a little bit afraid, and he said, "Look, I don't have enough gas to get out of town, so I'm going to have to take you to the gas station to get the gas." So they were, "Okay, let's go get the gas." That same night, Antonio was not scheduled to work, but they asked him to come in because there was one of the policemen was sick. So he got ready to go, and his daughter, Aunt Mary, the oldest daughter, remembered that because she cleaned the lint off his uniform, and he promised to take her out for ice cream. At those times, there were no two-way radios. They had call boxes on the telephone poles. And Antonio was walking his beat when one of the boxes lit up the red light. So he answered it, but he couldn't understand what the words were being spoken to him. So he decided he didn't go for a telephone. So he walked in a couple of blocks over to the Chardon Road garage and called up the police department. And he talked to Captain John Cezak, who advised him that there had been a robbery, and he identified who the men were gave an identification of who they were, and said they're sending a patrol car over to pick you up so you guys can go over to the scene of the crime and do your investigation. He hung up the phone, and just at that moment, several men walked into the gas station. He recognized the cab driver as one of them. And when he looked at him, he said, I think he thought there was fear in the man's eyes. And the story was that they tell that the cab driver yelled at him, "Tony, they're cops, they're crooks." So he stood up to reach for his weapon, but one of the men at the back of the crowd already had his weapon drawn, and he mortally wounded him. A nationwide manhunt for the killers took place, headed by Police Chief Owen O'Hare, and in time, the killers were brought to justice. Over the years, we've listened to this story and event and read the printed versions of newspapers and even detective magazines. I wonder, had he not been taken from us so many years ago, just how much our lives would have changed and been different. We'll never know. But we want you all to know how much we, the members of the Pingitore family, appreciate the efforts to remember his sacrifice through this obelisk and on the annual memorial service. And we echo the words on the memorial, "Let my name be the last." On behalf of all the members of the Antonio family, Pingitore family that are here today, those unable to be here, those are all gone, I would like to thank you for being here today to not only recognize our grandfather, but to all those who, like him, made the ultimate sacrifice. Antonio Pingitore, end of watch, March 31st, 1919.